Imagine building a life of luxury and prestige alongside someone you believe to be your perfect partner, only to watch it all crumble when he abandons you for not being able to have children. Now, picture yourself working at a gas station, struggling to get by only to discover you're pregnant with the child of the man who broke your heart. As if life weren't complicated enough, you come face to face with your ex-husband, now engaged to a young heiress, while you're alone and expecting. How would you handle this emotional roller coaster? Would you forgive the man who left you behind or move forward, determined to raise your child on your own? This is the story of Jasmine and Austin. Get ready for a gripping tale that will hold your attention from beginning to end, stirring deep emotions and keeping you eager for every twist and turn. The Houston skyline glittered like a constellation of earthbound stars as Austin Graham stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office. At 42, he was the epitome of success. CEO of Graham Enterprises, a Fortune 500 company that had its fingers in everything from real estate to tech startups. His reflection in the glass showed a man in his prime, salt and pepper hair artfully styled, a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than some people's monthly salary, and eyes that held the sharp glint of ambition. But tonight, those eyes were clouded with frustration. Austin's gaze drifted to a framed photo on his desk, him and his wife Jasmine on their wedding day 7 years ago. She was stunning, all honey blonde hair and megawatt smile, looking up at him with adoration. He remembered thinking he had it all that day. Now at 35, Jasmine was still beautiful, but that look of adoration had been replaced by something else, something that made Austin's jaw clench every time he saw it. The intercom buzzed, jolting Austin from his reverie. "Mr. Graham, your wife is here to pick you up for the charity gala." His assistant's voice crackled through the speaker. Austin sighed, straightening his tie. "Send her up, Linda, and you can head home for the night." Moments later, the elevator dinged, and Jasmine stepped out. She was a vision in an emerald green gown that hugged her curves, her hair swept up in an elegant updo. For a split second, Austin felt a flicker of the old spark, but it was quickly extinguished by the tightness around her eyes, the forced nature of her smile. "Ready to go, darling?" Jasmine asked, her voice honey-sweet, but with an underlying tension that had become all too familiar. Austin nodded, grabbing his jacket. "Let's get this over with," he muttered, immediately regretting the harshness of his tone when he saw Jasmine flinch. The ride to the Houston Museum of Fine Arts was silent, the air in the limousine thick with unspoken words. As they pulled up to the red carpet, Austin plastered on his media smile, the one that had graced countless magazine covers. He helped Jasmine out of the car, and they posed for the flashing cameras, the perfect power couple. "Austin, Jasmine, over here," reporters called out. "Any plans for starting a family soon?" Austin felt Jasmine stiffen beside him, her grip on his arm tightening painfully. He smoothly deflected the question with a practiced laugh. "We're just enjoying each other's company for now. Plenty of time for all that later." As they made their way inside, Jasmine leaned in close, her whisper sharp in his ear. "How many times do we have to go through this, Austin? When are you going to tell everyone that we've been trying for years?" Austin's jaw clenched. "Not here, Jazz. We'll talk about this later." The gala was a blur of champagne flutes, fake laughter, and business talk. Austin worked the room like the pro he was, but he couldn't shake the weight of Jasmine's gaze following him. He knew she hated these events, hated the facade they had to put on. But this was his world, the world he'd built for them. Why couldn't she just be happy with it? As the night wore on, Austin found himself by the bar, nursing a scotch and trying to avoid his mother's piercing stare from across the room. Evelyn Graham was a force of nature, the matriarch of the Graham family and the driving force behind much of Austin's success. She was also the source of immense pressure, especially when it came to the subject of grandchildren. "Austin, darling," Evelyn's voice cut through the crowd as she approached, air-kissing his cheek. "Where's Jasmine? I wanted to talk to her about the plans for the family Christmas card. We need to start thinking about these things, you know." Austin suppressed a groan. "Mother, it's May. I think we have some time before we need to worry about Christmas cards." Evelyn waved a bejeweled hand dismissively. "Nonsense. These things take planning. Besides, I was hoping this year's card might feature a new addition to the family." Her gaze was pointed, expectant. "Mother, please," Austin hissed, glancing around to make sure no one was in earshot. "We've talked about this. Jasmine and I will have children when we're ready." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "And when will that be, Austin?" You're not getting any younger, and neither is she. The Graham legacy needs an heir. Before Austin could respond, he felt a hand on his arm. Jasmine had appeared beside him, her smile brittle. "Mrs. Graham, how lovely to see you," she said, her voice dripping with forced sweetness. Evelyn's smile was equally strained. "Jasmine, dear, we were just talking about you. I was telling Austin how I can't wait to be a grandmother. Surely you must be feeling that biological clock ticking by now." Austin watched as something in Jasmine's eyes shattered. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, she turned on her heel and fled, disappearing into the crowd. "Excuse me," Austin muttered to his mother, following after his wife. He found Jasmine in a secluded corner of the museum's sculpture garden, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as she stared unseeing at a modernist piece. "Jazz," Austin said softly, approaching her cautiously, "I'm sorry about my mother. You know how she gets." Jasmine turned to face him, and the raw pain in her eyes made him take a step back. "Do I know, Austin? Do I really? Because it seems like every time we're around your family or your business associates or anyone really, I'm reminded of how I'm failing you, failing us." Austin ran a hand through his hair, frustration bubbling up. "You're not failing anyone, Jasmine. We're just having some trouble. It'll happen when it's meant to happen." Jasmine laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in the quiet garden. "When it's meant to happen? We've been trying for 5 years, Austin. 5 years of doctors and treatments and disappointments, and you still can't even admit to anyone that we're struggling. What do you want me to do, Jazz? Take out a full-page ad in the Houston Chronicle? Local CEO can't knock up his wife? Is that what you want?" The moment the words left his mouth, Austin knew he'd gone too far. Jasmine recoiled as if she'd been slapped, tears welling in her eyes. "No, Austin," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What I want is a husband who supports me, who doesn't make me feel like I'm some kind of failure, because my body won't do the one thing it's supposed to do." Austin felt a wave of guilt wash over him. He reached out to her, but she stepped away. "Jazz, I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "Save it," Jasmine cut him off. "I'm going home. Don't bother coming with me." Austin watched her walk away, feeling a chasm opening between them that he wasn't sure how to bridge. The next few weeks were a minefield in the Graham household. Jasmine threw herself into her charity work, often leaving before Austin woke and returning long after he'd gone to bed. When they did see each other, their conversations were stilted, filled with awkward silences and unspoken accusations. It all came to a head on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Austin had come home early, a rare occurrence, to find Jasmine sitting at the kitchen island, staring at a piece of paper in her hands. "Jazz?" he called out tentatively. "Everything okay?" She looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. "I got the results of my latest tests," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. Austin felt his heart skip a beat. "And?" Jasmine slid the paper across the island to him. "It's official. I can't have children. Ever." The words hit Austin like a physical blow. He scanned the medical jargon on the page, phrases like premature ovarian failure and extremely low probability of conception jumping out at him. "There has to be something else we can try," he said, grasping at straws. "Other treatments, surrogacy maybe." "No, Austin," Jasmine cut him off, her voice firm. "I'm done. I can't do this anymore. The treatments, the disappointments, the pity in everyone's eyes. I can't." Austin felt a surge of anger, irrational but overwhelming. "So that's it? You're just giving up? On us? On our future?" Jasmine's laugh was bitter. "Our future? Austin, we haven't had a real conversation in months. You can barely look at me anymore. Tell me honestly, can you see a future for us without children?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. Austin wanted to say yes, to tell her that she was enough, that they could build a life together, just the two of them. But the words wouldn't come. All he could see was his mother's disappointed face, the pitying looks from his colleagues, the empty nursery they'd painted years ago in a fit of optimism. His silence was answer enough. Jasmine nodded, a single tear finally escaping down her cheek. "I think," she said softly, "that maybe it's time we both admitted that this isn't working anymore." Austin felt as if the ground was shifting beneath his feet. "What are you saying, Jazz?" She stood up, smoothing out non-existent wrinkles in her shirt. "I'm saying that maybe we should consider divorce." The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. "Divorce? the end of their dream, their perfect life. Austin opened his mouth to argue, to fight for what they had, but found he had no fight left in him. Maybe Jasmine was right. Maybe this was the kindest thing they could do for each other. "Okay," he said finally, the word feeling like ashes in his mouth. "If that's what you want." Jasmine's eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't expected him to agree so easily. For a moment, Austin thought she might take it back, might suggest they try to work things out. But then she squared her shoulders, slipping back into the polite mask she wore for the outside world. "I'll have my lawyer draw up the papers," she said, her voice steady. "I'll be out of the house by the end of the week." As Austin watched her walk out of the kitchen, out of their life together, he felt a chapter closing. He'd built his entire world around the idea of the perfect family, the perfect life. Now, standing alone in the cavernous kitchen of their dream home, he realized that perhaps perfection came at too high a price. Little did he know, life was about to throw him a curveball that would shatter his perfectly constructed world and force him to reevaluate everything he thought he knew about love, family, and what truly matters in life. The harsh fluorescent lights of the Houston courthouse flickered overhead as Jasmine Graham, soon to be Jasmine Carter once again, signed the final divorce papers. Her hand trembled slightly, the gold pen feeling impossibly heavy. Across the table, Austin's face was impassive, his signature already dry on the dotted line. "That concludes our business here today," the lawyer intoned, gathering the documents. "Mrs. Graham, Ms. Carter, do you have any questions about the settlement?" Jasmine shook her head mutely. The settlement, such a clinical term for the dismantling of her entire life. She'd walked away with barely anything, a small alimony that would last 6 months, her personal belongings, and her car. Everything else, the house, the vacation properties, the investments, remained with Austin. She'd been too numb, too eager to just be done with it all, to fight for more. As they stepped out of the courthouse, the humid Houston air hit Jasmine like a wall. For a moment, she and Austin stood side by side, an awkward silence stretching between them. "So," Austin cleared his throat, "I guess this is it." Jasmine nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "I guess so. If you need anything—" "I won't," Jasmine cut him off, her voice sharper than she'd intended. She softened slightly. "Goodbye, Austin." Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the pavement. It wasn't until she reached her car, a sleek Audi that now felt like it belonged to someone else, that she allowed the first tears to fall. The next few weeks passed in a blur of cardboard boxes and goodbyes. Jasmine moved out of the sprawling River Oaks mansion she'd called home for the past 7 years, watching as movers packed up her life into a depressingly small stack of boxes. She'd never realized how little of the house had actually been hers. With nowhere else to go, Jasmine found herself on the doorstep of her best friend, Olivia Martinez. Olivia, a vivacious art gallery owner with a heart of gold, had been Jasmine's rock throughout the divorce proceedings. "Honey, you know you can stay here as long as you need," Olivia said, helping Jasmine lug her suitcases into the guest room of her cozy Montrose apartment. Jasmine managed a weak smile. "Thanks, Liv. I promise I'll start looking for a place of my own soon." Olivia waved her hand dismissively. "No rush. Now what do you say we open a bottle of wine and have a good old-fashioned pity party?" For the first time in months, Jasmine felt a genuine laugh bubble up inside her. "That sounds perfect." As the days turned into weeks, Jasmine struggled to find her footing in this new Austinless world. The alimony checks were enough to cover her basic needs, but they were a far cry from the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to. She'd never had to worry about things like budgets or job hunting before. One particularly frustrating afternoon, after another failed interview for a position she was woefully underqualified for, Jasmine found herself pulling into a gas station, her fuel gauge hovering dangerously close to empty. As she filled up her tank, wincing at the cost, her eyes landed on a help wanted sign in the station's window. Before she could talk herself out of it, Jasmine marched inside. "Excuse me," she said to the gruff-looking man behind the counter. "I saw your sign. Are you still hiring?" The man, whose name tag read Frank, looked her up and down, taking in her designer blouse and manicured nails. "You sure you want to work in a place like this, lady?" Jasmine straightened her spine. "I'm sure I want to work. Period." Frank's weathered face cracked into a small smile. "Fair enough. You start tomorrow, 6 a.m. sharp." And just like that, Jasmine Carter, former socialite and charity chairwoman, became a gas station attendant. The first few weeks were brutal. Jasmine's feet ached from standing for hours, her hands grew rough from handling grimy gas pumps, and the smell of stale coffee and cigarettes seemed to permeate her very being. But there was also a strange sense of pride in earning her own money, in learning to navigate this world so different from the one she'd left behind. Meanwhile, across town in River Oaks, Austin Graham was discovering that divorce suited him just fine. At least that's what he told himself as he adjusted his tie in the mirror, preparing for another night out with his new girlfriend, Megan Sinclair. Megan was everything Jasmine wasn't. Young, carefree, and from one of Houston's oldest oil families. At 28, she was a breath of fresh air in Austin's life, all bubbly laughter and spontaneous weekend getaways. She didn't carry the weight of failed expectations, didn't look at him with eyes full of unspoken disappointment. "Darling, are you ready?" Megan's voice floated up from downstairs. "We'll be late for the opera." Austin gave himself one last approving look in the mirror before heading down. Megan was a vision in a red gown, her dark hair swept up elegantly. As he helped her into her coat, Austin caught a whiff of her perfume, something young and floral, so different from Jasmine's signature scent. "You look beautiful," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her cheek. Megan beamed up at him. "And you look positively dashing, Mr. Graham. Now let's go show Houston how it's done." As they swept out of the house, Austin pushed away the nagging feeling that something was missing. This was what he wanted, a beautiful woman on his arm. No complications, no pressure. This was freedom. The next morning, as Austin nursed a slight champagne headache in his office, his intercom buzzed. "Mr. Graham, your mother is here to see you," his assistant's voice crackled through. Austin suppressed a groan. "Send her in, Linda." Evelyn Graham swept into the office like a perfectly coiffed hurricane, her Chanel suit immaculate as always. "Austin, darling," she air-kissed his cheek before settling into a chair across from his desk. "I think it's time we had a little chat." Austin braced himself. "About what, Mother?" Evelyn fixed him with a steely gaze. "About this little fling of yours with the Sinclair girl. Don't you think it's time you started thinking seriously about your future?" "I am thinking about my future," Austin defended. "Megan makes me happy." Evelyn's laugh was sharp. "Happy?" "Austin, happiness is all well and good, but it doesn't secure legacies. The girl is barely out of college. How do you expect her to be a suitable wife for a man of your stature?" Austin felt a flare of anger. "I don't recall asking for your opinion on my love life, Mother. Besides, who said anything about marriage? Don't be naive, Austin," Evelyn snapped. "You're not getting any younger. If you want children, which you do, need I remind you, you need to start thinking practically. Megan might be fun now, but is she really mother material?" The words hit Austin like a physical blow, memories of Jasmine and their struggles flooding back. He stood up abruptly. "I think this conversation is over, Mother. I have a meeting to prepare for." Evelyn rose gracefully, smoothing out non-existent wrinkles in her skirt. "Just think about what I said, darling, that's all I ask." With that, she glided out of the office, leaving behind the lingering scent of Chanel No. 5 and a cloud of unease. Across town, Jasmine was facing a different kind of morning after. She'd woken up feeling nauseous, a feeling that had persisted for the past few days. As she tied on her red gas station apron, preparing for another long shift, a sudden wave of dizziness washed over her. "Whoa there, Carter," Frank's gruff voice came from behind her. "You okay?" Jasmine steadied herself against the counter. "I'm fine. Just a little under the weather." Frank's bushy eyebrows furrowed. "You've been under the weather for a week now. Why don't you take the day off? Go see a doctor." Jasmine opened her mouth to protest, but another wave of nausea hit her. Maybe Frank was right. "Okay," she conceded. "I'll go get checked out." 3 hours later, Jasmine sat in a sterile exam room, her mind reeling. The doctor's words echoed in her ears. "Congratulations, Miss Carter. You're pregnant." Pregnant. The word she'd longed to hear for years, now landing like a bombshell in her already upended life. How was this possible? The doctors had told her. But then she remembered. That last night with Austin, a desperate, passionate attempt to save what was already broken. As she left the clinic, her hand unconsciously drifting to her still flat stomach, Jasmine felt a mix of emotions she couldn't begin to untangle. Joy, fear, anger, hope, all swirling together in a dizzying cocktail. She found herself walking aimlessly through Herman Park, watching families picnic on the grass, children squealing with delight on the playground. A life she'd thought forever out of reach was now growing inside her. But at what cost? She was alone, working a minimum wage job, living on her best friend's charity. How could she possibly be a mother now? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, Jasmine came to a decision. She would keep this baby, her miracle. But Austin could never know. He'd made his choice, had moved on to his young, uncomplicated girlfriend. This child was hers, and hers alone. Little did Jasmine know fate had other plans. Plans that would bring her and Austin crashing back into each other's orbits in the most unexpected of ways. Back in his River Oaks mansion, Austin was experiencing his own moment of clarity. As he watched Megan flit about the kitchen chattering about some society event, he felt a profound sense of emptiness. She was beautiful, fun, everything he thought he wanted. But as he looked at her, he couldn't picture a future, couldn't see her as the mother of his children, as a partner to grow old with. "Megan," he interrupted her mid-sentence, "I think we need to talk." Megan's smile faltered slightly. "About what, darling?" Austin took a deep breath. "About us. About where this is going." As he spoke, explaining as gently as he could that he didn't see a long-term future for them, Austin felt a weight lifting off his shoulders. Megan's face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. But even in his guilt, Austin knew he was doing the right thing. After Megan left, mascara streaks on her face and promises to remain friends ringing hollow in the air, Austin poured himself a scotch and stood at the window looking out over the Houston skyline. He'd dismantled his marriage, pushed away the woman he'd loved for years, all in pursuit of some ill-defined notion of happiness. And now here he was, successful, wealthy, and utterly alone. As he raised the glass to his lips, Austin made a silent vow. He would focus on himself, on figuring out what he truly wanted out of life. No more letting his mother's expectations or society's pressures dictate his choices. It was time for Austin Graham to find out who he really was, beyond the boardrooms and society pages. Little did he know, life was about to throw him a curveball that would shatter his perfectly constructed world and force him to reevaluate everything he thought he knew about love, family, and what truly matters in life. The following weeks saw both Austin and Jasmine settling into their new realities. For Jasmine, each day brought new challenges as she juggled her pregnancy with her job at the gas station. Morning sickness became her constant companion, and she found herself ducking into the grimy station bathroom more times than she cared to count. Her co-workers, a motley crew of people she never would have associated with in her previous life, became an unexpected source of support. There was Frank, the gruff but kind-hearted manager, who always made sure she took her breaks and didn't lift anything too heavy. Maria, a single mother of 3 who worked the night shift, shared tips on managing pregnancy symptoms and offered hand-me-down maternity clothes. Even Tommy, the pierced and tattooed college dropout who manned the register, showed his softer side by keeping a stash of crackers behind the counter for Jasmine's frequent bouts of nausea. One particularly rough morning, as Jasmine knelt on the cold tile floor of the bathroom, heaving into the toilet, she heard a soft knock on the door. "Jazz?" It was Olivia's voice. "Honey, are you okay?" Jasmine managed to croak out a weak, "Come in," before another wave of nausea hit her. Olivia slipped inside, her face a mask of concern. She knelt beside Jasmine, rubbing soothing circles on her back. "Oh, sweetie, this can't go on. You need to tell Austin." Jasmine shook her head vehemently, instantly regretting the motion as the room spun. "No, he made his choice, Liv. He doesn't get to be part of this." Olivia sighed. "I know he hurt you, Jazz, but this is his child too. Don't you think he has a right to know?" "A right?" Jasmine laughed bitterly, the sound echoing in the small space. "What about my rights? My right to not be thrown away like yesterday's trash. My right to have a husband who stood by me through thick and thin." Olivia was quiet for a moment, still rubbing Jasmine's back. "I get it, I do. But Jazz, think about your baby. Don't they deserve to know their father?" Jasmine closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I can't live. Not yet. Maybe someday. But right now I need to focus on getting through this pregnancy and figuring out how I'm going to raise this child on my own." Olivia nodded, helping Jasmine to her feet. "Okay, honey, it's your decision. But remember, you're not alone. You've got me and Frank and the whole gang here. We've got your back." As Jasmine looked at her friend's determined face, She felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She might have lost her old life, her old friends, but she'd gained something perhaps even more valuable: genuine connections with people who saw her for who she was, not what she could offer them. Meanwhile, Austin was facing his own set of challenges. The breakup with Megan had made headlines in Houston's society pages, and he found himself dodging pitying looks and not-so-subtle inquiries about his love life at every turn. His mother, predictably, was less than pleased. Evelyn Graham had cornered him at the country club, her voice low but intense. "Austin, darling, what were you thinking? The Sinclair girl was a perfect match. Do you have any idea how this makes us look?" Austin had felt a familiar surge of frustration. "Us, mother? Or you? I'm sorry if my personal life is inconveniencing your social calendar, but I'm not a chess piece for you to move around at will." Evelyn's eyes had narrowed dangerously. "Don't take that tone with me, young man. Everything I've done has been for your benefit, for the benefit of this family. Maybe it's time I decided what's best for me," Austin had shot back before walking away, leaving his mother sputtering in indignation. Now, as he sat in his office, staring unseeing at the spreadsheets on his computer screen, Austin found himself thinking about Jasmine. He wondered how she was doing, if she'd moved on, found someone new. The thought sent an unexpected pang through his chest. His musings were interrupted by a knock on his door. "Come in," he called out, grateful for the distraction. To his surprise, it was Carter, his VP of operations, and one of the few people in the company who'd known Jasmine well. "Hey, boss," Carter said, an odd expression on his face. "Got a minute?" Austin gestured for him to sit. "What's up, Carter?" Carter shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Look, I don't know if I should be telling you this, but I saw Jasmine the other day." Austin felt his heart skip a beat. "Oh? How is she?" Carter's frown deepened. "Not great, man. She was working at a gas station off I-10, pumping gas, if you can believe it." The words hit Austin like a physical blow. His Jasmine pumping gas. That can't be right," he muttered, more to himself than to Carter. Carter shrugged. "I know what I saw, boss. Look, I know it's none of my business, but she didn't look good. Tired, you know, and I could have sworn..." Austin leaned forward, his heart racing. "What? You could have sworn what?" Carter hesitated, then sighed. "I could have sworn she looked pregnant, man, but maybe I'm wrong. It was just a quick glimpse." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Austin gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles turning white. Pregnant? But how? They'd been told it was impossible. Unless... "Which gas station?" Austin demanded, already standing up and grabbing his jacket. Carter rattled off the address, concern etched on his face. "Austin, man, maybe you should think this through before..." But Austin was already out the door, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. If Jasmine was pregnant, if it was his child, everything would change. As he sped down I-10, weaving through Houston's notorious traffic, Austin's mind raced. How could he have let things get this bad? How could he have let Jasmine, the woman he'd once promised to love and cherish, end up working at a gas station? The guilt was overwhelming. He pulled into the station, his heart pounding, and there she was, her back to him as she restocked a shelf of motor oil. Even in the unflattering red uniform, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "Jasmine," he called out, his voice cracking slightly. She turned, and the look on her face, shock, fear, and something else he couldn't quite name, nearly brought him to his knees. And there, unmistakable now that he was looking for it, was the slight swell of her belly under her uniform. "Austin," she whispered, one hand instinctively moving to cover her stomach. "What are you doing here?" Before he could answer, Frank appeared from the back room, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. "Everything okay here, Jazz?" he asked, his tone making it clear he was ready to throw Austin out if necessary. Jasmine nodded, her eyes never leaving Austin's face. "It's okay, Frank. This is my ex-husband." The word ex hit Austin like a punch to the gut. He'd known, of course, but hearing her say it made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "Can we talk?" he asked, hating how desperate he sounded. "Please, Jazz, just for a few minutes." Jasmine hesitated, then nodded. "Frank, can I take my break now?" Frank looked between them, concern evident on his weathered face. "Sure thing, kid. Take all the time you need." As they walked to a quiet corner of the parking lot, Austin couldn't take his eyes off Jasmine. She looked different, thinner, more tired, but there was a strength in her bearing that he didn't remember seeing before. "You're pregnant," he said finally, when the silence became too much to bear. Jasmine nodded, her hand still protectively covering her belly. "I am." "Is it?" He couldn't bring himself to finish the question. "Yours?" Jasmine finished for him, a hint of bitterness in her voice. "Yes, Austin, it's yours. Apparently the doctors were wrong about me being infertile." The confirmation sent a wave of emotions through Austin. Joy, fear, regret, all mixed together in a dizzying cocktail. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jasmine's laugh was hollow. "Tell you when, Austin? When you were signing the divorce papers? Or maybe when you were plastered all over the society pages with your new girlfriend?" Each word was like a knife, cutting through the carefully constructed justifications Austin had built up over the past months. "Jazz, I'm so sorry. I never meant..." "Never meant what, Austin?" Jasmine cut him off, her eyes flashing with anger and hurt. "Never meant to throw away our marriage? Never meant to leave me with nothing while you moved on with your perfect new life?" Austin felt the weight of his mistakes crushing down on him. "I was an idiot," he said softly. "I was scared and selfish, and I made the biggest mistake of my life letting you go." For a moment, he saw a flicker of something in Jasmine's eyes. A softening, perhaps. But then it was gone, replaced by a steely resolve. "It's too late for that, Austin," she said, her voice firm. "I'm doing this on my own. I don't need your money or your pity." "It's not pity," Austin protested. "Jazz, this is my child too, our child. Please, let me be a part of this. Let me make things right." Jasmine was quiet for a long moment, her hand absently rubbing her belly. When she spoke, her voice was soft but determined. "I can't do this right now, Austin. I need time. Time to think, to figure out what I want, what's best for me and for this baby." Austin wanted to argue, to beg, to promise her the world, but he knew he'd lost that right. Instead, he nodded, swallowing hard. "I understand, but Jazz, please, don't shut me out completely. Let me help, even if it's just financially for now." Jasmine hesitated, then nodded slightly. "I'll think about it, but I need you to promise me something, Austin." "Anything," he said immediately. "Don't tell anyone about the baby. Not your mother, not your friends, not yet. I need to do this on my terms." Austin felt a pang at the thought of keeping this secret, especially from his mother. But he knew he owed Jasmine this much, and so much more. "I promise," he said solemnly. As Jasmine turned to go back to work, Austin called out one last time. "Jazz, I know I have no right to ask this, but can I call you just to check in?" Jasmine paused, then turned back to him with a small, sad smile. "Once a week," she said. "That's all I can handle right now." As he watched her walk away, back straight and head held high, Austin felt a mix of hope and despair. He'd been given a second chance, a miracle he never thought possible, but he knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. He'd hurt Jasmine deeply, had nearly destroyed the beautiful life they'd built together. As he got back into his car, Austin made a silent vow. He would prove to Jasmine that he could change, that he could be the man she deserved, the father their child needed. No matter how long it took, no matter what he had to do, he would make things right. Little did he know the universe had more surprises in store for both of them, twists and turns that would test their resolve, challenge their perceptions, and ultimately, perhaps, lead them back to each other. The Houston summer sun beat down mercilessly as Austin Graham pulled his sleek Audi R8 into the rundown gas station off I-10. The place was a far cry from the high-end establishments he usually frequented, with its faded signage and cracked asphalt. But none of that mattered now. His heart raced as he scanned the forecourt, searching for a familiar face. It had been 2 weeks since his confrontation with Jasmine, 2 weeks of sleepless nights and constant gnawing worry. True to his word, he'd called her once a week, their conversations stilted and formal. Jasmine had steadfastly refused his offers of financial help, insisting she could manage on her own. But the image of her in that gas station uniform, exhaustion etched on her face, haunted him. As he stepped out of his car, the heat hit him like a wall. Austin loosened his tie, feeling conspicuously overdressed in his tailored suit. A few patrons gave him curious looks as he made his way towards the station's small convenience store. That's when he saw her. Jasmine was behind the counter, ringing up a customer's purchase. Even in the unflattering fluorescent light, she was beautiful. Her honey blonde hair was pulled back in a messy bun, wisps escaping to frame her face. The red uniform shirt couldn't hide the gentle swell of her belly, more pronounced now than it had been 2 weeks ago. Austin's breath caught in his throat. This was real. They were really having a baby. As the customer left, Jasmine looked up. Her eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in what looked like irritation. "Austin, what are you doing here?" He approached the counter, suddenly unsure of himself. I wanted to see you to make sure you're okay." Jasmine's sigh was heavy with exasperation. "I told you I'm fine. You didn't need to come all the way out here." Before Austin could respond, a gruff voice called out from the back room. "Jazz, your shift's over. You can head out now." Jasmine called back a quick thanks, then turned to Austin. "I have to go. Please just go home, Austin." But as she stepped out from behind the counter, she suddenly swayed, her face going pale. Austin was at her side in an instant, his arm around her waist to steady her. "Whoa, easy there," he murmured, concern etched on his face. "Are you okay?" Jasmine nodded, but her complexion was ashen. "I'm fine, just a little dizzy. It happens sometimes." "Sometimes?" Austin's worry deepened. "Jazz, have you seen a doctor recently?" She pulled away from him, her jaw set stubbornly. "I have an appointment next week. I told you I can handle this." But as she took a step towards the door, her knees buckled. Austin caught her before she could fall, scooping her up into his arms despite her weak protests. "That's it," he said firmly. "I'm taking you to the hospital, no arguments." To his surprise, Jasmine didn't fight him. She just closed her eyes, her head resting against his chest. The familiar scent of her shampoo, something floral and delicate, filled his senses, bringing back a flood of memories. As he carried her out to his car, Austin noticed Frank watching from the doorway, concern etched on his weathered face. "Take care of her," the older man called out gruffly. Austin nodded, a lump in his throat. "I will," he promised, meaning it with every fiber of his being. The drive to Houston Methodist Hospital was tense, with Austin constantly glancing over at Jasmine. She sat with her eyes closed, one hand resting protectively on her belly. "Talk to me, Jazz," Austin pleaded. "What's been going on? Have you been feeling sick often?" Jasmine sighed, her eyes fluttering open. "It's just normal pregnancy stuff, Austin. Morning sickness, fatigue. I'm fine." But Austin couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. The Jasmine he knew would never have allowed herself to get to this point of exhaustion. What had changed? At the hospital, Austin's name and the promise of a sizable donation got them seen immediately. As they sat in a private exam room waiting for the doctor, the silence between them was deafening. Finally, Austin couldn't take it anymore. "Jazz, please, talk to me. What's really going on?" Jasmine's laugh was bitter. "What's going on? You want to know what's going on, Austin? I'm pregnant, working a minimum wage job, living on my best friend's couch, and trying to figure out how I'm going to raise a child on my own. That's what's going on." The words hit Austin like a physical blow. "But why?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you doing this alone? I told you I want to help." Jasmine's eyes flashed with anger and hurt. "Because I don't want your help, Austin. I don't want to be your charity case. You made your choice when you walked away from our marriage. You don't get to swoop in now and play the hero." Before Austin could respond, the door opened and the doctor walked in. Dr. Emily Chen was a petite woman with a kind smile and sharp eyes. She looked between Austin and Jasmine, clearly sensing the tension. "Miss Carter," she asked, addressing Jasmine, "I'm Dr. Chen. Can you tell me what's been going on?" As Jasmine described her symptoms, the dizziness, the extreme fatigue, the persistent nausea, Austin felt a growing sense of guilt and shame. How had he let things get this bad? Dr. Chen listened attentively, then began her examination. When she pulled out the ultrasound machine, Austin felt his heart skip a beat. This was it. He was about to see his child for the first time. As the grainy image appeared on the screen, Austin felt tears prick at his eyes. There in black and white was a tiny human being, their child. He reached for Jasmine's hand without thinking, and to his surprise, she didn't pull away. "Everything looks good," Dr. Chen said with a smile. "The baby's developing normally. However, Ms. Carter, I am concerned about your blood pressure. It's higher than I'd like to see at this stage of pregnancy." Jasmine nodded, her face a mask of calm. But Austin could feel her hand trembling in his. "I'm prescribing you some medication to help manage it," Dr. Chen continued. "And I want you on bed rest for at least the next week. No work, no stress, just rest. Can you do that?" Jasmine's calm facade cracked slightly. I can't take a week off work. I need the money. Austin squeezed her hand gently. Jazz, please, let me help. Just for the baby's sake, if not for yours. For a long moment, Jasmine was silent. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. As they left the hospital, prescriptions in hand, Austin felt a mix of relief and trepidation. Jasmine had agreed to stay at his place for the week, to ensure she actually rested. But he knew the battle was far from over. The drive to River Oaks was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. As Austin pulled up to his sprawling mansion, he saw Jasmine's eyes widen slightly. Had she forgotten how they used to live? Or was she just realizing how much her life had changed? Come on, he said softly, helping her out of the car. Let's get you settled. As they walked into the house, Austin was suddenly hyper-aware of every luxury, every extravagance. The marble floors, the crystal chandelier, the priceless art on the walls, all of it seemed garish and unnecessary in the face of Jasmine's struggle. He led her to one of the guest rooms, a spacious suite decorated in soothing blues and greens. You can stay here, he said. I'll be just down the hall if you need anything. Jasmine nodded, her eyes taking in the room. Thank you, she said quietly. Then, almost to herself, I'd forgotten how big this place is. Austin felt a pang of guilt. Jazz, But she cut him off with a raised hand. Not now, Austin. I'm tired. I just want to rest. He nodded, backing out of the room. Of course. Sleep well. As he closed the door behind him, Austin leaned against the wall, his head in his hands. How had everything gone so wrong? And more importantly, how could he make it right? Over the next few days, Austin did everything he could to make Jasmine comfortable. He had healthy meals prepared by his personal chef, hired a masseuse for prenatal massages, and even set up a small home theater in her room so she could watch her favorite movies. But despite his efforts, Jasmine remained distant. She was polite, even grateful at times, but the warmth and intimacy they once shared seemed irretrievably lost. On the third night of Jasmine's stay, Austin found himself unable to sleep. He wandered down to the kitchen, only to find Jasmine already there, sitting at the island with a glass of water. Can't sleep? He asked softly, not wanting to startle her. Jasmine shook her head. The baby's been kicking up a storm, she said, a small smile playing at her lips. Austin's heart leapt. Can I feel? For a moment, he thought she might refuse, but then she nodded, gesturing for him to come closer. As he placed his hand on her belly, Austin felt a strong kick against his palm. Tears sprang to his eyes. That's amazing, he whispered. Jasmine's smile grew a little wider. It is, isn't it? For a moment they stood there in comfortable silence, both focused on the miracle growing inside Jasmine. Then, almost hesitantly, Jasmine spoke. Austin, she said softly, why did you really come to the gas station that day? Austin took a deep breath. It was time for honesty. Because I couldn't stand the thought of you struggling while I lived in luxury, he admitted. Because I realized what an idiot I'd been to let you go. Because I still love you, Jazz. Jasmine's sharp intake of breath was audible in the quiet kitchen. Austin, don't... But he pressed on. I know I hurt you. I know I made a terrible mistake. But Jazz, if you'll let me, I want to make it right. I want to be there for you and our baby, not just financially, but in every way. Jasmine was quiet for a long moment, her hand absently rubbing her belly. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I'm scared, Austin. Scared to trust you again. Scared to let you back in. Austin nodded, understanding all too well. I know, and you have every right to be. But Jazz, I promise you, I'm not the same man who walked away from our marriage. I've changed, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving that to you if you'll let me. Jasmine looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I don't know if I can, she said softly, but maybe we can try, for the baby's sake. It wasn't a declaration of love, or even forgiveness. But it was a start, and for Austin it was enough. As the days passed, Austin and Jasmine fell into a tentative routine. They shared meals, watched movies together, and even started discussing names for the baby. Slowly but surely, the ice between them began to thaw. But just as Austin was starting to hope for a real reconciliation, life threw him another curveball. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon. Jasmine was napping upstairs, and Austin was in his home office, catching up on some work. The doorbell rang, and assuming it was the groceries he'd ordered, Austin went to answer it. But it wasn't the delivery man standing on his doorstep. It was Megan, his ex-girlfriend, and she looked distraught. "Megan," Austin said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" Megan's eyes were red-rimmed, her normally perfect makeup smudged. "We need to talk, Austin," she said, her voice shaky. "It's important." Against his better judgment, Austin let her in, leading her to the living room. "What's going on, Megan? Are you okay?" Megan took a deep breath, twisting her hands in her lap. "I'm pregnant, Austin," she blurted out. And it's yours." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Austin felt like he couldn't breathe. "What?" he managed to choke out. "But we were always careful. How?" Megan shrugged helplessly. "I don't know. But I'm sure, Austin. I'm about 10 weeks along." Austin's mind was reeling. 10 weeks. That would put conception right around the time he and Megan had broken up. But something didn't add up. "Megan," he said slowly, "we broke up almost 3 months ago. Why are you only telling me this now?" Megan's face crumpled. Because I wasn't sure at first. And then when I found out, I was scared. I didn't know what to do." But as Austin looked at her, really looked at her, he saw something in her eyes that made him pause. A flicker of guilt? "Megan," he said, his voice low and controlled, "I need you to be honest with me. Is this baby really mine?" Megan's eyes widened, then filled with tears. I don't know," she whispered. "There's a chance it might be someone else's." The admission hit Austin like a punch to the gut. He stood up abruptly, pacing the room as he tried to process this new information. "Who?" he demanded. "Who else could be the father?" Megan's voice was barely audible. "James, my ex. We ran into each other at a party, right after you and I broke up. One thing led to another." Austin felt a bizarre mix of relief and anger wash over him. Relief that the baby might not be his, anger at the deception. "So why come to me? Why not go to James?" Megan looked up at him, her eyes pleading. "Because James is married, Austin. He won't leave his wife. And I thought maybe you thought I'd take you back," Austin finished for her, the realization dawning. "That we'd raise this baby together, whether it was mine or not." Megan nodded miserably. "I'm sorry, Austin. I know it was wrong. I didn't know what else to do." Austin took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions raging inside him. "Megan, I can't do this. Not now, not ever. I'm sorry you're in this situation, but I can't be the solution." As if on cue, a voice called out from the stairs. "Austin, is everything okay?" Austin turned to see Jasmine standing there, one hand on her swollen belly, confusion and concern etched on her face. Megan's gasp was audible. You're pregnant?" she asked, looking between Austin and Jasmine. Austin moved to Jasmine's side, instinctively protective. "Yes, she is," he said firmly. "Jasmine is my wife, Megan, my pregnant wife." The look of shock and betrayal on Megan's face would have been almost comical if the situation wasn't so serious. She stood up abruptly, grabbing her purse. "I see," she said, her voice tight. I'll go. I'm sorry for bothering you." As Megan rushed out, nearly tripping in her haste, Austin turned to Jasmine. Her face was a mask of confusion and hurt. "Austin," she said softly, "what's going on?" And so, for the second time that day, Austin found himself explaining a complicated and painful situation. He told Jasmine everything, about Megan's claim, about the possibility that the baby wasn't his, about Megan's attempt to manipulate him. When he finished, Jasmine was quiet for a long moment. Then, to Austin's surprise, she started to laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh, but rather one of disbelief and perhaps a touch of hysteria. "Oh, Austin," she said, shaking her head, "what a mess we've made of things." Austin couldn't help but chuckle ruefully. "We certainly have," he agreed. Then, more seriously, "Jazz, I want you to know no matter what happens with Megan or her baby, you and our child are my priority. Always." Jasmine looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. Then, slowly, she nodded. "I believe you," she said softly. "But Austin, we have a lot to figure out. This isn't just about us anymore. We're going to be parents, and we need to think about what's best for our child." Austin nodded, relief washing over him at Jasmine's words. "You're right," he agreed. "And I want to do this right, Jazz. I want to be there for every moment, every decision, if you'll let me." Jasmine sighed, her hand unconsciously moving to her belly. I think I think I'd like that. But Austin, we can't just pick up where we left off. Too much has happened. I know, Austin said softly, and I don't expect that. I just want a chance to prove to you that I've changed, that I can be the man you deserve, and the father our child needs. As they stood there in the living room, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor, Austin felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't going to be easy, and they had a long road ahead of them, but for the first time in months, he felt like they might actually have a future together. Over the next few weeks, Austin threw himself into preparing for the baby's arrival. He converted one of the spare rooms into a nursery, consulting Jasmine on every decision from the color of the walls to the type of crib. He attended every doctor's appointment, his heart swelling with pride each time they heard the baby's strong heartbeat. But even as they grew closer, Austin could feel Jasmine holding back. She was warmer towards him, yes, but there was still a wall between them, a hesitancy in her actions that spoke of lingering hurt and mistrust. One evening, as they sat on the patio watching the sunset, Austin decided it was time to address the elephant in the room. "Jazz," he said softly, "I know I hurt you, deeply, and I know saying sorry isn't enough, but I want you to know that leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life. I let my mother's expectations and my own insecurities cloud my judgment, and I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me." Jasmine was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the horizon. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Why did you do it, Austin? Was I really not enough for you?" The pain in her voice broke Austin's heart. He reached for her hand, relieved when she didn't pull away. "No, Jazz. You were more than enough. You were everything. I was the one who wasn't enough. I let my mother's obsession with having grandchildren and carrying on the family name get to me. I convinced myself that if we couldn't have children, we weren't a real family. But I was wrong. So wrong." Jasmine turned to look at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "And now? Now that we're having a baby, is that why you want to be with me?" Austin shook his head vehemently. "No, Jazz. I want to be with you because I love you. Baby or no baby, you're the only woman I want to spend my life with. These past few months without you, they've been hell. I've realized that all the success, all the money in the world means nothing if I don't have you to share it with." A single tear slipped down Jasmine's cheek. Austin reached out, gently wiping it away with his thumb. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said softly, "but if you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life making it up to you, being the husband and father you both deserve." Jasmine was quiet for a long moment, her hand absently rubbing her swollen belly. When she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "I want to believe you, Austin, I do, but I'm scared. Scared of being hurt again. Scared of letting you in only to have you walk away." Austin felt his own eyes fill with tears. "I know, Jazz, and you have every right to be scared, but I promise you on everything I hold dear, I will never leave you again. You and this baby are my world now. My everything." As the last rays of the sun disappeared below the horizon, Jasmine leaned into Austin's embrace. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start, a chance to rebuild what they had lost, to create something even stronger. As they sat there, wrapped in each other's arms, the baby kicked as if sensing the moment. Jasmine laughed softly, guiding Austin's hand to feel the movement. And in that moment, Austin knew with absolute certainty that this little family they were creating was all he would ever need. The weeks turned into months, and as Jasmine's due date approached, Austin found himself falling more in love with her every day. He marveled at her strength, her grace in the face of all they'd been through, and slowly but surely, he saw the walls between them crumbling. But just as things seemed to be falling into place, life threw them another curveball. It was a crisp autumn evening, and Austin and Jasmine were enjoying a quiet dinner at home when the doorbell rang. Austin opened the door to find Megan standing there, her face pale and drawn. "Austin," she said, her voice shaky, "I need to talk to you. It's important." As he led Megan into the living room, Austin felt a sense of dread wash over him. Jasmine, who had followed him to the door, sat down beside him, her hand instinctively finding his. Megan took a deep breath, her eyes darting between Austin and Jasmine. I had a paternity test done," she said. "The baby, it's not yours, Austin. It's James's." The relief Austin felt was immediate and overwhelming, But as he looked at Megan, saw the fear and uncertainty in her eyes, he felt a pang of sympathy. "What are you going to do?" he asked gently. Megan shrugged helplessly. "I don't know. James, he doesn't want anything to do with the baby. He says he can't risk his marriage. I'm scared, Austin. I don't know how to do this alone." To Austin's surprise, it was Jasmine who spoke next. "You don't have to do it alone," she said softly. "We can help you, Megan, if you want." Megan's eyes widened in shock. You'd do that? After everything?" Jasmine nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "We're all human, Megan. We all make mistakes. What matters is how we move forward from them." As Austin looked at Jasmine, he felt a surge of love and admiration so strong it nearly took his breath away. This was the woman he'd fallen in love with, compassionate, forgiving, with a heart big enough to offer help to someone who had once been her rival. In that moment, Austin knew with absolute certainty that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with this incredible woman, and he knew exactly how he was going to make that happen. The next day, while Jasmine was out having lunch with Olivia, Austin put his plan into motion. He called in favors, made arrangements, and by the time Jasmine returned home, everything was ready. "Austin?" Jasmine called out as she entered the house. "Where are you?" "In the backyard," Austin called back, his heart racing with anticipation. As Jasmine stepped out onto the patio, she gasped. The entire backyard had been transformed. Twinkling lights hung from the trees, creating a magical glow. A path of rose petals led to the center of the yard, where Austin stood waiting, dressed in a suit. "Austin," Jasmine breathed, her eyes wide. "What is all this?" Austin took her hand, leading her down the petal-strewn path. When they reached the center, he took both her hands in his, looking deep into her eyes. "Jasmine," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "7 years ago, I stood in this very spot and made you a promise. A promise to love you, to cherish you, to stand by you through thick and thin, and I failed. I broke that promise, and in doing so, I nearly lost the best thing that ever happened to me." Jasmine's eyes filled with tears as Austin continued. "But by some miracle, I've been given a second chance. A chance to make things right, to be the man you deserve, and I don't intend to waste it." Slowly, never breaking eye contact, Austin lowered himself to one knee. He pulled out a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a stunning diamond ring. "Jasmine Carter," he said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "Will you marry me? Again? Will you give me the chance to spend the rest of my life proving to you how much I love you, how much you mean to me?" For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, with tears streaming down her face, Jasmine nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Austin, I will." As Austin slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms, he knew that this was just the beginning. They had a long road ahead of them, challenges to face and obstacles to overcome. But together, with love and trust and the little miracle growing inside Jasmine, he knew they could face anything. And as the sun set on that perfect autumn evening, Austin and Jasmine stood in each other's arms, looking towards a future filled with hope, love, and the promise of new beginnings. The weeks following Austin's proposal were a whirlwind of emotions for both him and Jasmine. While the joy of their reconciliation and the excitement of their impending parenthood were palpable, there was still an undercurrent of tension, a residual wariness born from past hurts. Jasmine, in particular, found herself grappling with conflicting emotions. She loved Austin, had never stopped loving him, but the memory of his betrayal still stung. As she sat in the nursery one afternoon, folding tiny onesies and arranging stuffed animals, she found herself lost in thought. "You okay in there?" Austin's voice startled her out of her reverie. He stood in the doorway, a concerned look on his face. Jasmine managed a small smile. "Yeah, just thinking." Austin crossed the room, sitting down beside her on the plush carpet. "Want to share?" For a moment, Jasmine was quiet, her hands absently stroking her swollen belly. Then, softly, she spoke. "I'm scared, Austin. Not just about the baby, but about us. About trusting you again." Austin's heart clenched at the pain in her voice. He reached for her hand, relieved when she didn't pull away. "I know, Jazz, and you have every right to be scared. What I did, it was unforgivable. Then why did you do it?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken hurt. Austin took a deep breath. "Because I was weak," he admitted. I let my mother's expectations and my own insecurities get the best of me. I convinced myself that without a child we weren't a real family, that I was somehow less of a man. Jasmine's eyes flashed with anger. And that made it okay to throw away our marriage, to leave me with nothing? No, Austin said firmly. Nothing made that okay. It was the biggest mistake of my life, Jazz, and I will spend the rest of my days making it up to you if you'll let me. Jasmine was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the crib in the corner of the room. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I need to know that you're here for me, Austin. Not just for the baby, but for me. That even if this pregnancy hadn't happened, you'd still want to be with me. Austin turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. Jasmine, look at me, he said softly. When she met his gaze, he continued, you are everything to me. Baby or no baby, you are the only woman I want to spend my life with. These past months without you, they've been hell. I realized that all the success, all the money in the world means nothing if I don't have you to share it with. Tears welled up in Jasmine's eyes. I want to believe you, Austin, I do, but it's not that easy, Austin finished for her. I know, Jazz, and I don't expect it to be. All I'm asking for is a chance to prove myself to you day by day. Jasmine nodded, wiping away a stray tear. Okay, she said softly. We'll take it day by day. As the weeks passed, Jasmine found herself rediscovering her own strength. The woman who had once been content to be Austin Graham's wife, to live in his world of wealth and privilege, was gone. In her place was a woman who had faced adversity head-on, who had rebuilt her life from the ground up. One sunny afternoon, Jasmine invited Olivia over for lunch. As they sat on the patio sipping iced tea and catching up, Olivia noticed a change in her friend. You seem different, Jazz, Olivia observed. More, I don't know, confident. Jasmine smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that lit up her entire face. I feel different, she admitted. For the first time in a long time, I feel like me. Not Austin's wife, not just a mother-to-be, but me. Jasmine. Olivia reached across the table, squeezing her friend's hand. I'm so proud of you, sweetie. You've come so far. As they continued to chat, Jasmine found herself opening up about her conflicted feelings towards Austin. I love him, Liv, she said softly. I never stopped loving him, but sometimes I look at him and I see the man who left me, who threw away our marriage like it meant nothing. Olivia nodded sympathetically. That's understandable, Jazz. He hurt you deeply. It's going to take time to rebuild that trust. But what if I can't? Jasmine's voice was barely above a whisper. What if I can never fully trust him again? Olivia was quiet for a moment, considering her words carefully. Jazz, honey, only you can decide if you're willing to take that risk. But from what I've seen, Austin is genuinely trying to make amends. He's not the same man who left you. Jasmine nodded, her hand unconsciously moving to her belly. I know, and I want to believe in us, in our future. But I also need to know that I can stand on my own 2 feet, that I'm not just falling back into our old patterns. Then don't, Olivia said simply. You're not the same woman you were before, Jazz. You're stronger now, more independent. Don't lose that. Make Austin understand that if he wants to be with you, it has to be as equals. As Olivia's words sank in, Jasmine felt a sense of clarity wash over her. She didn't have to choose between her love for Austin and her newfound independence. She could have both. It was up to her to set the terms of their relationship moving forward. Meanwhile, Austin was grappling with his own journey of self-discovery and growth. The man who had once measured his worth by his bank account and social status was learning to see the world and himself in a new light. It started with a conversation with Carter, his VP of operations, who had become something of a confidant over the past few months. Boss, Carter said one afternoon, leaning back in his chair in Austin's office, have you ever thought about, doing more with all this? He gestured vaguely at the opulent office around them. Austin frowned. What do you mean? Carter shrugged. I mean, you've got more money than you could spend in 10 lifetimes. Have you ever thought about using it to make a real difference? The question struck a chord in Austin. He'd always made the obligatory donations to charities, attended the requisite fundraisers, but had he ever truly used his wealth and influence to effect real change? That night, as he lay in bed, Austin found himself unable to sleep, Carter's words echoing in his mind. He thought about Jasmine, about how she'd struggled after their divorce, about all the other people out there facing similar hardships. In that moment, Austin made a decision that would change the course of his life. The next morning, he called an emergency board meeting. As he stood before the stunned faces of his executives, Austin laid out his plan. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice steady and determined, "I've called you here today because I'm making some changes. Effective immediately, I'm donating half of my personal fortune to establish a foundation dedicated to helping single parents and families in need." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Austin held up a hand, silencing them. "Furthermore, I'll be stepping down as CEO of Graham Enterprises. I'll remain on the board, but it's time for new leadership, someone who can take this company in a fresh direction." As the executives bombarded him with questions and objections, Austin felt a sense of peace wash over him. For the first time in his life, he was making a decision not based on profit margins or social standing, but on what he truly believed was right. When he told Jasmine about his decision that evening, her reaction surprised him. Instead of the shock or disapproval he'd half expected, her face lit up with a proud smile. "Austin," she said softly, taking his hand, That's amazing. I'm so proud of you." Her words, so simple yet so profound, brought tears to Austin's eyes. "I want to be a man worthy of you, Jazz," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Worthy of our child." Jasmine cupped his face in her hands, looking deep into his eyes. "You are," she whispered. "This man, right here. This is the man I fell in love with." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Austin threw himself into setting up the foundation, working tirelessly to ensure that the money would be used effectively to help those truly in need. He hired experts in social work and community development, determined to create programs that would make a real, lasting difference. But Austin knew that donating money wasn't enough. He wanted to truly understand the struggles of those he was trying to help. And so, in a move that shocked Houston society, Austin Graham, former CEO and millionaire, moved out of his River Oaks mansion and into a modest apartment in a working-class neighborhood. The transition was far from easy. Austin, used to a life of luxury, found himself grappling with the realities of living on a budget. He learned to cook simple meals, to do his own laundry, to navigate public transportation. Each day brought new challenges, but also new insights. One evening, about a month into his new life, Austin found himself at a local diner, nursing a cup of coffee and going over the foundation's budget. The waitress, a tired-looking woman in her 40s, approached his table. "Refill, hon?" she asked, holding up the coffee pot. Austin nodded gratefully. As she poured, he noticed the dark circles under her eyes, the way her uniform hung loosely on her frame. "Long day?" he asked kindly. The woman, her name tag read Betty, shrugged. "Just like any other. Gotta pay the bills somehow, right?" As Betty walked away, Austin felt a pang in his chest. How many times had he interacted with people like her in his old life without truly seeing them, without understanding their struggles? That night, as he lay in his small, sparsely furnished bedroom, Austin made another decision. The next day, he walked into a local diner, not as a customer but as a job applicant. The manager, a burly man named Mike, looked at Austin's resume with skepticism. "Look, buddy," he said gruffly, "you're way overqualified for this. Why would you want to work as a waiter?" Austin met the man's gaze steadily. "Because I need to learn," he said simply. "I need to understand." Whether it was the sincerity in Austin's voice or just desperation for reliable help, Mike shrugged and handed him an apron. "All right, you start tomorrow, 6 a.m. sharp." And so began Austin Graham's crash course in real life. The work was hard, the hours long, the pay meager. His feet ached, his back hurt, and more often than not, he collapsed into bed at night, too exhausted to even think. But with each passing day, Austin felt like he was truly living for the first time in his life. He got to know his co-workers, single mothers working multiple jobs to support their kids, students putting themselves through college, immigrants sending money back to their families. He listened to their stories, shared their struggles, celebrated their small victories. One particularly busy Saturday afternoon, as Austin rushed between tables, he looked up to see a familiar face entering the diner. Jasmine, her belly now prominently swollen, stood in the doorway, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on him. For a moment, Austin froze, suddenly acutely aware of his grimy apron and disheveled hair. But then Jasmine smiled, a warm, proud smile that made his heart skip a beat. As he approached her table, notepad in hand, Austin couldn't help but grin. "What can I get for you today, Mom?" he asked, playing along. Jasmine's eyes twinkled with amusement. "Well, I hear the handsome waiter is quite the special," she teased. Austin felt a blush creep up his neck. "I'm afraid that's not on the menu," he quipped back. Then, more softly, "What are you doing here, Jazz?" Jasmine's smile softened. "I wanted to see you," she said simply. "To see this." She gestured around the diner. "Olivia told me about your new job. I hope you don't mind." Austin shook his head. "Of course not. I didn't want you to see me like this." Jasmine reached out, taking his hand. "Austin," she said softly, "I've never been more proud of you than I am right now. This is the man I always knew you could be." As Austin looked into Jasmine's eyes, he saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. Trust. Pure, unwavering trust. And in that moment, he knew that all the struggles, all the hard work, had been worth it. That night, as they sat on the small balcony of Austin's apartment, sharing a simple meal of takeout Chinese food, Jasmine turned to Austin with a serious expression. "I've been thinking," she said softly, "about us, about our future." Austin felt his heart rate pick up. "Oh?" he managed, trying to keep his voice steady. Jasmine nodded, her hand unconsciously moving to her belly. "I love you, Austin. I never stopped loving you. But I'm not the same woman I was before. I can't just be your wife living in your world. I need to be me." Austin reached out, taking her hand. "I know, Jazz, and I love you for who you are, not for who I want you to be. Whatever you need, whatever makes you happy, that's what I want." Jasmine smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "I want us," she said softly, "you and me as equals, building a life together, on our own terms." As Austin pulled Jasmine into his arms, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. They had a long road ahead of them, challenges to face and obstacles to overcome. But together, with love and understanding and a shared commitment to growth, he knew they could face anything. And as the sun set over the Houston skyline, casting a golden glow over the city, Austin and Jasmine sat in comfortable silence, looking towards a future filled with hope, love, and the promise of new beginnings. The Houston summer heat was oppressive, the air thick and heavy as Austin made his way home from another long shift at the diner. His feet ached, his back was sore, but there was a lightness in his step that hadn't been there months ago. He was tired, yes, but it was the satisfying exhaustion of honest work, of a day spent in service to others. As he climbed the stairs to his modest apartment, Austin's mind drifted to Jasmine. She was due any day now, and the anticipation was palpable. They'd grown closer over the past few months, rebuilding their relationship brick by brick, but there was still a fragility to it all, a sense that one wrong move could bring everything crashing down. He was so lost in thought that he almost missed the sound coming from inside his apartment, a low, pained moan that sent a jolt of fear through his heart. "Jasmine?" he called out, fumbling with his keys. "Jazz, are you okay?" The door swung open to reveal Jasmine, bent over the kitchen counter, her face contorted in pain. "Austin," she gasped, relief evident in her voice. "The baby. It's coming." For a moment, Austin froze, panic threatening to overwhelm him. But then his newfound strength kicked in, the resilience he'd built over months of hard work and self-reflection. "Okay," he said, his voice calm and steady. "It's going to be okay, Jas. We've got this." He moved quickly, grabbing the hospital bag they'd prepared weeks ago, helping Jasmine into a comfortable position. As he dialed for an Uber, the irony of not being able to drive his pregnant wife to the hospital in a luxury car not lost on him, Austin felt a surge of determination. This was their moment, their chance to start anew, and he was not going to let anything stand in their way. The ride to the hospital was tense, Jasmine's contractions coming faster and more intensely with each passing minute. Austin held her hand, murmuring words of encouragement, his heart racing with a mixture of fear and excitement. "You're doing great, Jazz," he said softly, wiping the sweat from her brow. "Just breathe, remember? Like we practiced." Jasmine nodded, her grip on his hand tightening as another contraction hit. "Austin," she gasped, "I'm scared." The vulnerability in her voice nearly broke him. This was Jasmine, his strong, independent Jasmine who had faced so much adversity with grace and determination. To see her scared, To hear the tremor in her voice made Austin's protective instincts flare. "I know, sweetheart," he said, pulling her close, "but I'm right here. We're in this together, okay? You and me." As they arrived at the hospital, events seemed to blur together. Nurses swarmed around them, whisking Jasmine away to a delivery room, machines beeping and monitors flashing. Austin followed in a daze, his focus entirely on Jasmine, on her needs, her comfort. Hours passed in a haze of pain and anticipation. Austin never left Jasmine's side, holding her hand, wiping her brow, encouraging her through each contraction. He massaged her back when the pain became too much, fed her ice chips when her throat was dry, and whispered words of love and support continuously. "You're the strongest person I know, Jazz," he said, during a particularly difficult contraction. "You've got this, our baby is almost here." Jasmine looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and determination. "We've got this," she corrected him, squeezing his hand. "Together." As dawn broke over Houston, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Jasmine's labor intensified. The doctor, a kind-faced woman named Dr. Rodriguez, checked her progress and smiled. "All right, Jasmine," she said. "It's time to push. Are you ready?" Jasmine nodded, her face set in determination. She looked up at Austin, fear and excitement warring in her eyes. "Don't leave me," she whispered. Austin leaned down, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Never," he promised. "I'm right here always." What followed was the most intense, terrifying, and beautiful experience of Austin's life. He watched in awe as Jasmine, his incredible, strong Jasmine, brought their child into the world. He counted with her through the pushes, encouraged her when she felt she couldn't go on, and marveled at the sheer strength and determination she displayed. And then, suddenly, the room was filled with the most beautiful sound Austin had ever heard, the strong, lusty cry of their newborn child. "It's a boy," Dr. Rodriguez announced, holding up the squirming, red-faced infant. Austin felt his knees go weak, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his son for the first time. He was perfect, absolutely perfect. "You did it, Jazz," he whispered, turning to Jasmine with awe in his eyes. "You're amazing. He's amazing." Jasmine, exhausted but radiant, reached out for their son. As the nurse placed the baby on her chest, Austin watched the most beautiful transformation take place. The fear and pain in Jasmine's eyes melted away, replaced by a love so pure and strong it took his breath away. "Hello, little one," Jasmine cooed, her voice thick with emotion. "We've been waiting for you." Austin leaned in, gently stroking his son's cheek with one finger. The baby's eyes, unfocused but bright, seemed to search for the source of his voice. And in that moment, Austin felt his world shift on its axis. "I love you," he said softly, the words meant for both Jasmine and their son. "Both of you, so much." As Jasmine looked up at him, her eyes shining with tears and a love that matched his own, Austin felt a sense of completeness he'd never experienced before. This was what mattered. This was what life was all about. The next few days passed in a blur of sleepless nights, diaper changes, and moments of pure, unadulterated joy. They named their son Ethan, a name that meant strong and enduring, a testament to the journey that had brought them to this point. As they prepared to leave the hospital, Austin found himself overwhelmed by a mix of excitement and fear. This was it. They were taking their son home, starting their life as a family. "Ready?" he asked Jasmine, who was cradling Ethan in her arms. She looked up at him, a soft smile playing on her lips. "As I'll ever be," she replied. Then, more softly, "Thank you, Austin, for being here, for everything." Austin felt his heart swell with love. He leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead, then to Ethan's. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be," he said simply. The ride home was surreal. Austin found himself driving with a caution he'd never exhibited before, acutely aware of the precious cargo in the back seat. Every bump in the road, every sudden stop at a traffic light, had him glancing anxiously in the rearview mirror. Jasmine noticed his tension and reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "Relax," she said softly. "We're okay, all of us." As they pulled up to their apartment building, the same modest complex Austin had moved into months ago, Austin felt a momentary pang of regret. This wasn't the life he'd envisioned for his family, for his child. But as he helped Jasmine out of the car, carefully cradling Ethan in his arms, he realized something profound. This life, This simple, honest life they were building together was worth more than all the luxury and privilege he'd once known. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, and moments of pure, unadulterated joy. Austin threw himself into fatherhood with the same dedication and determination he'd shown in rebuilding his life. He was up for every midnight feeding, changed diapers with surprising skill, and spent hours simply holding Ethan, marveling at every tiny yawn and stretch. Jasmine watched Austin's transformation with a mixture of surprise and growing admiration. This was a side of him she'd never seen before, tender, patient, and utterly devoted. One night, as Austin gently rocked Ethan back to sleep after a particularly fussy bout, Jasmine found herself overcome with emotion. She approached them quietly, wrapping her arms around Austin from behind and resting her cheek against his back. "You're amazing with him," she whispered. Austin turned slightly, careful not to disturb the now sleeping Ethan. "You think so?" he asked, a note of vulnerability in his voice. Jasmine nodded, moving to stand beside him. She reached out, gently stroking Ethan's cheek. "I do. You're a natural, Austin. A wonderful father." The pride and love in her voice made Austin's heart swell. He looked down at their son, then back at Jasmine, overwhelmed by the depth of his feelings for both of them. "I love you," he said softly. "Both of you. More than I ever thought possible." Jasmine's eyes met his, and for a moment, Austin saw a flicker of the old warmth, the love they'd once shared. But then she looked away, a shadow passing over her face. "Jazz?" he asked, concerned. "What is it?" She was quiet for a long moment, her hand still resting on Ethan's tiny form. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm scared, Austin. Scared of how much I love you, of how much I want this to work." Austin felt his heart skip a beat. He carefully placed Ethan in his crib, then turned to face Jasmine fully. "Why does that scare you?" he asked gently. Jasmine's eyes filled with tears. "Because I can't go through that pain again. I can't let myself trust you completely, only to have you walk away." The words hit Austin like a physical blow. He reached out, cupping Jasmine's face in his hands. "Jasmine, look at me," he said, softly but firmly. When she met his gaze, he continued, "I know I hurt you. I know I betrayed your trust in the worst possible way, and I will spend the rest of my life making up for that mistake. But I promise you, with everything that I am, I will never leave you again. You and Ethan are my world, my everything." Jasmine searched his face, looking for any sign of insincerity, but all she saw was love, pure and unwavering. Slowly, hesitantly, she leaned into his embrace. "I want to believe you," she whispered against his chest. "I want to trust in us again." Austin held her close, his heart racing. "Then let's rebuild that trust, day by day," he said, "together." As the weeks turned into months, Austin and Jasmine fell into a rhythm, navigating the challenges of new parenthood together. Austin continued to work at the diner, his co-workers delighting in pictures and stories of little Ethan. Jasmine, after her maternity leave, started working part-time at a local community center, using her skills to help other mothers in need. Their life was far from perfect. Money was often tight, and they faced the same struggles as any new parents. Exhaustion, self-doubt, moments of frustration. But through it all, they grew stronger, both as individuals and as a couple. Austin's transformation continued to amaze Jasmine. She watched as he juggled work, fatherhood, and his commitments to the foundation he'd started, all without complaint. He was up early every morning, making breakfast and packing lunches before heading to work. In the evenings, he'd come home tired but always with a smile, eager to spend time with Ethan and help with household chores. One Saturday afternoon, as they sat in the small park near their apartment, watching Ethan toddle around on unsteady legs, Jasmine found herself studying Austin. He was laughing, his face alight with joy as he encouraged their son's wobbly steps. This man, she realized, was a far cry from the Austin she'd married years ago. He was kinder, more grounded, with a depth of character she'd always hoped he'd develop. "What are you thinking about?" Austin asked, catching her gaze. Jasmine smiled softly. "You," she said simply. "How much you've changed. How proud I am of the man you've become." Austin's eyes widened slightly, a hopeful look crossing his face. "Yeah?" Jasmine nodded, reaching out to take his hand. "Yeah. "Austin, I think I'm ready." "Ready for what?" he asked, his heart racing. "To trust in us again," Jasmine said softly. "To really give our relationship another chance." Austin felt a surge of emotion so strong it nearly overwhelmed him. He squeezed Jasmine's hand, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Are you sure?" he asked, hardly daring to believe it. Jasmine nodded, a soft smile playing on her lips. "I am. You've shown me day after day that you're committed to us, to our family. I see how hard you work, how much you've grown. And I love you, Austin." "I never stopped loving you." Austin pulled her into his arms, holding her close as tears of joy slipped down his cheeks. "I love you too, Jazz," he whispered. "So much. Thank you for giving me this chance. I promise I won't let you down." As they sat there in the park, their son playing happily nearby, Austin and Jasmine felt a sense of peace wash over them. They had weathered the storm, faced their demons, and come out stronger on the other side. Their journey was far from over, but they were facing it together, with love, trust, and a renewed commitment to each other and their family. That evening, as they tucked Ethan into bed, Austin felt a sense of completeness he'd never experienced before. He watched as Jasmine sang a soft lullaby, her voice gentle and soothing. Ethan's eyes drifted closed, his tiny hand wrapped around Jasmine's finger. Once they were sure Ethan was asleep, they tiptoed out of the nursery, gently closing the door behind them. In the dim light of the hallway, Austin pulled Jasmine close. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Jasmine looked up at him, her eyes soft in the low light. "For what?" "For everything," Austin said. "For giving me a second chance. For our beautiful son. For believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." Jasmine reached up, cupping his face in her hands. "You earned this second chance, Austin. You've shown me every day the kind of man you truly are, the kind of father and partner you can be." Austin leaned in, resting his forehead against hers. "I promise you, Jazz, I will spend every day of the rest of our lives proving that your trust in me is well placed. You and Ethan are everything to me." As their lips met in a tender kiss, both Austin and Jasmine felt the last of their walls crumbling. This was a new beginning for them, a fresh start built on a foundation of love, trust, and shared experiences. The next morning, as sunlight streamed through the windows of their modest apartment, Austin woke early. He slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Jasmine, and padded quietly to the kitchen. With a newfound energy and purpose, he set about making breakfast. Nothing fancy, just some scrambled eggs, toast, and fresh fruit. But he prepared it with care, arranging everything on a tray with a small vase holding a single flower he'd picked from the window box. As he carried the tray back to the bedroom, he heard Ethan stirring in the nursery. Setting the tray down, he quickly went to fetch their son, cradling the sleepy-eyed toddler in his arms. "Good morning, little man," Austin whispered, pressing a kiss to Ethan's forehead. "Want to help me surprise Mommy?" Ethan's response was a sleepy giggle, his tiny hands reaching up to pat Austin's face. Together they entered the bedroom. Jasmine was just beginning to stir, her eyes fluttering open as Austin set Ethan down on the bed. "Good morning, beautiful," Austin said softly, leaning down to kiss her. Jasmine smiled, her eyes lighting up as she saw Ethan crawling towards her. "Good morning," she murmured, pulling their son close for a cuddle. "What's all this?" Austin retrieved the breakfast tray, setting it carefully on the bed. "Just a little something to start our day right," he said, his eyes twinkling. "The first day of the rest of our lives together." As they sat there, sharing breakfast and laughing at Ethan's attempts to steal bites of toast, Austin felt a profound sense of rightness. This was what he'd been searching for all along. Not wealth or status, but the simple joy of a lazy morning with the people he loved most in the world. Jasmine must have sensed his thoughts, because she reached out and took his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. Austin smiled, his eyes moving from Jasmine to Ethan and back again. "Just how perfect this is," he said. "How lucky I am to have you both in my life. I spent so many years chasing after the wrong things, thinking success was measured in dollars and cents. But this right here, is true success." Jasmine's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Oh, Austin," she whispered, leaning in to kiss him softly. "I feel the same way. We've been through so much, but it's all led us here, and I wouldn't change a thing." As they finished their breakfast, planning out their day, a trip to the park, maybe some grocery shopping, nothing extraordinary but everything precious. Austin felt a surge of determination. He would never take this for granted, never lose sight of what truly mattered again. The weeks that followed were filled with a joy that neither Austin nor Jasmine had ever experienced before. They fell into a comfortable routine, balancing work, parenthood, and their rekindled relationship with a grace that surprised them both. Austin continued his work at the diner, but with a renewed sense of purpose. He saw each interaction with a customer, each plate served as an opportunity to make someone's day a little brighter. His co-workers noticed the change in him, commenting on his constant smile and positive attitude. One slow afternoon, as Austin was wiping down tables, his manager Mike approached him. "You know, Graham," he said gruffly, "when you first started here, I thought you were crazy. A guy with your background wanting to wait tables. But I gotta say, you've proven me wrong. You're one of the hardest workers I've ever had." Austin felt a warmth spread through his chest at the unexpected praise. "Thank you, Mike," he said sincerely. "That means a lot." Mike nodded, a rare smile crossing his weathered face. "How would you feel about taking on some more responsibility around here? Assistant manager position just opened up. Pay's not much better, but it's a start." For a moment, Austin was tempted to decline. He'd grown comfortable in his current role, and the idea of taking on more responsibility was daunting. But then he thought of Jasmine and Ethan, of the life they were building together. This was an opportunity to provide more for his family, to continue growing and challenging himself. "I'd be honored, Mike," Austin said, extending his hand. "Thank you for the opportunity." As he drove home that evening, Austin couldn't keep the smile off his face. He couldn't wait to share the news with Jasmine. When he walked through the door of their apartment, he was greeted by the sight of Jasmine and Ethan curled up on the couch, reading a story together. The scene was so perfect, so domestic, that for a moment Austin just stood there taking it all in. Ethan was the first to notice him, his little face lighting up. "Dada!" he exclaimed, wiggling off Jasmine's lap and toddling towards Austin as fast as his little legs could carry him. Austin scooped him up, peppering his face with kisses as Ethan giggled delightedly. "Hello, my little man," he said, his voice filled with love. "Have you been good for Mommy today?" Jasmine stood up, coming over to greet Austin with a kiss. "He's been an angel," she said, her eyes twinkling, "but he missed his daddy." "We both did." As they settled in for dinner, a simple meal of spaghetti that Jasmine had prepared, Austin shared his news about the promotion. Jasmine's face lit up with pride and excitement. "Oh, Austin, that's wonderful," she exclaimed, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "I'm so proud of you." Austin felt a warmth spread through his chest at her words. "Thank you, Jazz," he said softly. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. Your support, your love, it means everything to me." As they cleaned up after dinner, Ethan playing contentedly with his toys nearby, Jasmine turned to Austin with a thoughtful expression. "You know," she said, "I've been thinking, maybe it's time we started looking for a place of our own." Austin raised an eyebrow, surprised. "You mean buy a house?" Jasmine nodded. "Nothing fancy," she said quickly. "Just something small with a little yard for Ethan to play in. I know money's still tight, but with your promotion and my job at the community center, I think we could make it work." Austin felt a surge of excitement at the idea. A house of their own, a real home for their family. It was more than he dared to hope for just a few months ago. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Jas," he said, pulling her close. "Let's do it. Let's build our future together." As they stood there in their tiny kitchen, Ethan's happy babbles filling the air, Austin and Jasmine felt a sense of hope and excitement for what lay ahead. They had weathered the storm, faced their demons, and come out stronger on the other side. Their journey was far from over, but they were facing it together, with love, trust, and a renewed commitment to each other and their family. The future stretched out before them, full of possibilities and promise. And as Austin looked at Jasmine, saw the love and trust shining in her eyes, he knew that no matter what challenges they might face, they would face them together. This was their second chance, their new beginning, and they were going to make the most of every single moment. The Houston skyline glittered in the distance as Austin and Jasmine strolled hand in hand through Herman Park. It was a balmy evening in late spring, the air filled with the scent of blooming flowers and the distant laughter of children playing. Ethan toddled ahead of them, his chubby legs carrying him from one exciting discovery to another. "Careful, buddy," Austin called out. his voice a mix of pride and concern as Ethan attempted to climb a small hill. "Don't go too far." Jasmine squeezed his hand, a soft smile playing on her lips. "He's fine, Austin. Let him explore a little." Austin nodded, marveling at how far they'd come. A year ago, he would have been too preoccupied with work or social obligations to enjoy a simple evening in the park. Now, these moments with his family were the highlight of his day. As they reached the top of the hill, Austin pulled Jasmine close, wrapping his arm around her waist. "Do you remember the first time we came here?" he asked softly. Jasmine leaned into him, her eyes distant with memory. "Of course. It was our third date. You were trying so hard to impress me with your knowledge of the park's history." Austin chuckled, a slight blush coloring his cheeks. "I was nervous. You were the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen, and I couldn't believe you'd agreed to go out with me. And now look at us," Jasmine said, her voice filled with wonder. She watched as Ethan crouched down to examine a colorful leaf, his face scrunched in concentration. "We've come so far." Austin turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "We have," he agreed. "And I fall more in love with you every day, Jazz. You and Ethan, you're my whole world." Jasmine's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Oh, Austin," she whispered, leaning in to kiss him softly. As they stood there, silhouetted against the setting sun, Austin felt a sense of rightness wash over him. This was where he belonged. This was home. Over the next few weeks, Austin found himself consumed by a secret project. He'd wake up early, sneaking out of bed while Jasmine and Ethan still slept, to make phone calls and send emails. He'd stay up late, poring over plans and making arrangements. Jasmine noticed his distraction, of course. One evening, as they were getting ready for bed, she finally broached the subject. "Austin," she said, her voice tinged with concern, "is everything okay? You've seemed preoccupied lately." Austin paused in the middle of folding laundry, a guilty expression crossing his face. "Everything's fine, Jazz," he assured her quickly. "I've just been working on something, a surprise." Jasmine raised an eyebrow, a mix of curiosity and apprehension in her eyes. "A surprise?" "Austin, we agreed no more big gestures. We're doing fine as we are." Austin set down the shirt he was folding and crossed the room to her, taking her hands in his. "I know, love, and I promise, this isn't about money or status or any of that. It's just something special for us. Do you trust me?" Jasmine searched his face for a moment, then nodded. "Of course I trust you," she said softly. "I just don't want you stressing yourself out." Austin pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "No stress," he promised. "Just love." As the days passed, Austin's excitement grew. Everything was falling into place perfectly. He'd enlisted the help of Olivia, Jasmine's best friend, to keep her distracted on the big day. He'd even managed to get time off work, telling Mike it was for a special family event. Finally, the day arrived. Austin woke early, his heart racing with anticipation. He slipped out of bed, pressing a soft kiss to Jasmine's forehead before heading to the kitchen to start breakfast. As he was flipping pancakes, he heard the patter of little feet behind him. "Dada!" Ethan's voice called out, full of early morning enthusiasm. Austin turned, scooping his son up into his arms. "Good morning, little man," he said, peppering Ethan's face with kisses. "Ready for a big day?" Ethan giggled, reaching for the spatula in Austin's hand. "Big day," he repeated, though Austin was sure he didn't understand the significance. A few minutes later, Jasmine appeared in the doorway, her hair tousled from sleep. "Something smells good," she said, stifling a yawn. Austin's heart swelled at the sight of her. Even in her old pajamas, with no makeup and bedhead, she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, leaning in to kiss her softly. "Happy anniversary." Jasmine's eyes widened in surprise. "Anniversary?" she repeated. "But our wedding anniversary isn't for months, and the day we got back together was last week." Austin grinned, a mischievous twinkle in his eye. "It's the anniversary of our first date," he explained, "and I have a whole day planned for us." Jasmine looked touched, if a bit confused. "Austin, you didn't have to—" "I wanted to." He cut her off gently. "Now eat up. Olivia will be here soon to watch Ethan, and we have places to be." An hour later, they were in Austin's car, driving through the streets of Houston. Jasmine kept trying to guess where they were going, but Austin remained tight-lipped, a secretive smile playing on his lips. Finally, they pulled up in front of a familiar building. Jasmine gasped as she recognized it. "The Houston Museum of Fine Arts," she said softly. "This is where we had our first real conversation." Austin nodded, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "You remember," he said, his voice filled with emotion. They spent the morning wandering through the museum, reminiscing about their early days together. Austin had arranged for a private tour, allowing them to take their time and enjoy each other's company without the crowds. As they stood in front of a particularly beautiful painting, Austin wrapped his arm around Jasmine's waist. "Do you remember what you said to me here?" he asked softly. Jasmine leaned into him, a soft smile playing on her lips. "I said that art was like love," she recalled, "that the most beautiful pieces were often the ones that had been broken and put back together." Austin nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "I didn't understand then," he said, "but I do now. We were broken, Jazz. But look at us now, we're stronger, more beautiful than ever." Jasmine turned to face him, tears shimmering in her eyes. "Oh, Austin," she whispered, leaning in to kiss him softly. After the museum, Austin drove them to their favorite restaurant, a small Italian place where they'd had their first official date. The owner, an elderly man named Giovanni, greeted them warmly. "Ah, Mr. and Mrs. Graham," he exclaimed, ushering them to a secluded table in the back. "It's been too long." As they enjoyed their meal, Austin couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd come. The last time they'd been here, he'd been so focused on impressing Jasmine with his wealth and status. Now, he was content just to be in her presence, to share a simple meal and conversation. "What are you thinking about?" Jasmine asked, noticing his thoughtful expression. Austin reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Just how lucky I am," he said softly. "How grateful I am for this second chance with you." Jasmine squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with love. "I'm the lucky one," she said. "You've changed so much, Austin. You've become the man I always knew you could be." After lunch, Austin drove them to Herman Park. As they walked hand in hand through the lush gardens, Jasmine noticed that Austin seemed nervous, fidgeting with something in his pocket. "Austin," she said, stopping to face him. "What's going on?" Austin took a deep breath, his heart racing. This was it, the moment he'd been planning for weeks. He led Jasmine to a secluded spot near a beautiful fountain, the same spot where he'd first told her he loved her years ago. "Jasmine," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "7 years ago I stood in this very spot and told you I loved you. I meant it then, but I didn't truly understand the depth of that love. I didn't understand what it meant to truly commit to someone, to put their needs above my own." Jasmine's eyes widened as Austin slowly lowered himself to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "I made a terrible mistake when I let you go," Austin continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "But by some miracle I've been given a second chance. A chance to love you the way you deserve to be loved, to be the partner and father our family needs." He opened the box, revealing a stunning diamond ring, not as ostentatious as her original engagement ring, but somehow more beautiful in its simplicity. "Jasmine Carter," Austin said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "Will you marry me? Again, will you give me the chance to spend the rest of my life proving to you how much I love you, how much you mean to me?" For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, with tears streaming down her face, Jasmine nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Austin. I will." As Austin slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms, cheers erupted around them. Jasmine looked up in surprise to see their friends and family emerging from hiding spots around the park. Olivia was there with Ethan in her arms, both of them beaming. Even Austin's mother, Evelyn, was present, a look of genuine happiness on her face that Jasmine had rarely seen before. "You planned all this?" Jasmine asked, looking up at Austin in wonder. Austin nodded, a sheepish grin on his face. "I wanted to recreate all the important moments of our relationship," he explained, "to show you how far we've come and how much further I want to go with you." As their loved ones surrounded them with hugs and congratulations, Jasmine felt a sense of completeness she'd never experienced before. This was what love was supposed to be, not grand gestures or material wealth, but the steady, unwavering commitment to choose each other every day. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of planning and preparation. Austin and Jasmine decided on a small, intimate ceremony in the backyard of their new home, a modest but charming house they'd purchased together with a little yard for Ethan to play in. As the day of the ceremony approached, Austin found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. He thought about the man he used to be, driven by ambition and the need for status, unable to see the true value of what he had. And he marveled at the man he'd become, humbled, grateful, and more in love than he'd ever thought possible. The morning of the ceremony dawned bright and clear, a perfect Houston spring day. Austin woke early, his heart full of excitement and nervous anticipation. As he stood in front of the mirror adjusting his tie, he heard a soft knock at the door. "Come in," he called out, expecting it to be his best man, Carter. To his surprise, it was his mother, Evelyn, who entered the room. She looked elegant as always in a pale blue dress, but there was a softness in her expression that Austin wasn't used to seeing. "Austin," she said, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "Do you have a moment?" Austin nodded, turning to face her fully. "Of course, Mother. Is everything okay?" Evelyn took a deep breath, smoothing non-existent wrinkles from her dress. "I owe you an apology," she said finally, her eyes meeting his. "I pushed you too hard for too long. I was so focused on what I thought success should look like that I didn't see the damage I was doing to you and Jasmine." Austin felt a lump form in his throat. He'd never heard his mother admit to being wrong before. "Mother," he began, but she held up a hand to stop him. "Let me finish," she said. "Watching you these past few months, seeing how you've grown, how happy you are with Jasmine and Ethan, I realized that I was wrong about so many things. True success isn't about money or status. It's about love, family, being true to yourself. And you, my dear boy, have achieved more success than I ever dreamed possible." Tears welled up in Austin's eyes as Evelyn stepped forward, cupping his face in her hands. "I'm so proud of you, Austin," she said softly, "and I'm sorry it took me so long to see what truly matters." Austin pulled his mother into a tight embrace, years of tension and misunderstanding melting away. "Thank you, Mother," he whispered. "That means more to me than you know." As they pulled apart, both wiping away tears, Evelyn straightened Austin's tie with a watery smile. "Now," she said, her voice regaining some of its usual briskness, "let's get you married, shall we?" The ceremony was everything Austin and Jasmine had dreamed of. Simple, heartfelt, and surrounded by the people they loved most. As Austin stood at the makeshift altar, watching Jasmine walk towards him with Ethan toddling beside her, he felt a sense of rightness that went bone deep. Jasmine was radiant in a simple white sundress, her hair adorned with wildflowers. But it was the love shining in her eyes that took Austin's breath away. As they exchanged vows, promises of love, fidelity, and partnership that felt more meaningful now than ever before, Austin felt the last pieces of his old self falling away. This was who he was meant to be, who he'd always been underneath the ambition and the need for approval. "I, Austin, take you, Jasmine, to be my wife," he said, his voice steady and full of conviction. "I promise to love you fiercely and faithfully, to support your dreams as you've supported mine, to be your partner in all things. I promise to remember every day how precious this second chance is, and to never take our love for granted." Tears slipped down Jasmine's cheeks as she repeated her own vows, her voice filled with emotion. "I, Jasmine, take you, Austin, to be my husband. I promise to love you through good times and bad, to trust in the man you've become and the journey we're on together. I promise to be your safe harbor, your biggest cheerleader, and your faithful companion. This second chance is a gift, and I vow to cherish it always." As they sealed their vows with a kiss, their friends and family erupting in cheers and applause, Austin felt a sense of peace wash over him. This was home. This was where he belonged. The reception that followed was a joyous affair, full of laughter, dancing, and heartfelt toasts. Austin watched in amazement as his mother bonded with Jasmine's parents, as his co-workers from the diner mingled easily with his old business associates. It was a beautiful blending of his old life and new, a testament to how far they'd come. As the evening wore on, Austin found a quiet moment alone with Jasmine. They stood on the edge of the makeshift dance floor, Jasmine's head resting on Austin's shoulder as they swayed gently to the music. "Happy," Austin murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. Jasmine lifted her head, her eyes shining with love and contentment. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she said softly. "You've amazed me, Austin. The way you've grown, the man you've become. I fall more in love with you every day." Austin felt his heart swell with emotion. "It's all because of you, Jess," he said. "You and Ethan. You gave me a reason to be better, to strive for something more meaningful than money or status. You're my everything." As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms with the sounds of their loved ones' laughter surrounding them, Austin and Jasmine felt a sense of profound gratitude. They had weathered the storm, faced their demons, and come out stronger on the other side. Their journey was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, moments of doubt and struggle. But they faced the future with hope, love, and an unwavering commitment to each other and their family. As the night drew to a close, Austin and Jasmine said their goodbyes to their guests. Ethan, exhausted from the excitement of the day, had long since fallen asleep in his grandmother's arms. Evelyn approached them, a soft smile on her face as she handed the sleeping toddler to Jasmine. "He's a beautiful child," Evelyn said, her voice filled with genuine warmth. "You've done well, both of you." Austin felt a lump form in his throat at his mother's words. "Thank you, Mother," he said softly. "That means a lot to us." Evelyn nodded, her eyes misty. "I know I haven't always been supportive," she admitted, "but I want you to know, I'm proud of you, Austin, of both of you. The life you've built, the family you've created, it's beautiful." Jasmine, cradling the sleeping Ethan, reached out and squeezed Evelyn's hand. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "We'd love for you to be a bigger part of our lives, and Ethan's life, moving forward." A look of genuine happiness crossed Evelyn's face. "I'd like that very much," she said. As Evelyn walked away to say her goodbyes to the other guests, Austin wrapped his arm around Jasmine's waist, pulling her and Ethan close. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Graham?" he asked softly. Jasmine looked up at him, her eyes shining with love and contentment. "More than ready, Mr. Graham," she replied. They made their way through the dwindling crowd of guests, saying their final goodbyes. Austin couldn't help but marvel at how different this felt from their first wedding. Back then, it had been all about impressing others, about putting on a show. Now it was intimate, genuine, filled with love and warmth. As they climbed into their car, the same modest sedan Austin had bought when he first started working at the diner, Jasmine turned to him with a soft smile. "You know," she said, "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad things happened the way they did." Austin raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Really? Even the bad parts?" Jasmine nodded, reaching out to take his hand. "Even the bad parts," she confirmed, "because without them, we wouldn't be who we are now. We wouldn't have this deeper understanding of what really matters in life." Austin brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "You're right," he agreed. "I wouldn't trade what we have now for anything in the world." As they drove home through the quiet Houston streets, Ethan sleeping peacefully in the back seat, Austin felt a sense of profound gratitude wash over him. This was his family, his home, his everything. And he vowed silently to never lose sight of that again. The next few months were a whirlwind of change and new beginnings. Austin continued to excel in his role as assistant manager at the diner, his natural leadership skills and newfound humility making him popular with both staff and customers. Jasmine, inspired by her experiences, decided to go back to school part-time to get a degree in social work, determined to help other families facing challenges. Their little house became a hub of activity and love. Weekends were filled with barbecues in the backyard, Ethan's laughter echoing as he chased bubbles or played in his kiddie pool. Austin's mother became a regular visitor, doting on Ethan and slowly rebuilding her relationship with her son and daughter-in-law. One lazy Sunday afternoon, as Austin and Jasmine sat on their porch swing watching Ethan play in the yard, Jasmine turned to her husband with a mischievous glint in her eye. "You know," she said casually, "I was thinking as maybe it's time we gave Ethan a sibling." Austin's eyes widened in surprise and joy. "Really?" he asked, his voice filled with excitement. "You want to have another baby?" Jasmine nodded, a soft smile playing on her lips. "I do," she confirmed. "What do you think?" Austin pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I think it's a wonderful idea," he said softly. "Our family, growing together. It's all I've ever wanted." As they sat there, wrapped in each other's arms and watching their son play, Austin and Jasmine felt a sense of peace and contentment that neither had ever experienced before. They had faced tremendous challenges, weathered storms that would have torn many couples apart. But through it all, they had found their way back to each other, stronger and more in love than ever. Their journey was far from over. There would be new challenges to face, new joys to celebrate. But together, with love, trust, and an unwavering commitment to each other and their family, they were ready to face whatever life had in store. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over their little slice of paradise, Austin whispered a silent prayer of gratitude for second chances, for growth, for the love of a good woman and the joy of fatherhood, for the life they had built together, brick by brick, day by day. This was his happily ever after. Not a fairy tale ending, but something far more precious, a real, messy, beautiful life filled with love, laughter, and the promise of a bright future together. If this story resonated with your soul, don't miss out on the other powerful narratives we have to share. Subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and join us as we explore stories that can bring new meaning to your journey. Don't wait. Your next video is already waiting for you. Click now and continue this journey with us.